Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's video is the last video about the big block Chevy dyno mule, the first dyno session that's covered in this book. This is the last one. We're just going to go over the couple of other little tests that happened. One being the comparison between these Rite 270 ovals versus the Rite 294 rectangular ports. We'll show the power difference between the two because that was it was unusual. And then we'll go through some other tests that happened. Wouldn't make for a whole video, but I'm just going to throw them in so you can kind of see. There was just a bunch of extra stuff. This video may not end up being that long, so hopefully you get something out of it though. So anyway, all the results that you see here are in this book, and you can actually purchase this book. So I know it's hard seeing it on the screen, and if you watch enough of these videos, you hear me do the same spiel each time. I'm not really trying to sell the books, although I am because I bought them, but more because it's easier for some of you to see. And I know as a person, I would much rather be able to look at something and flip through it back and forth instead of trying to find a video, get through the commercials to find the information. So I just try to get the book. If you want the book, it's on my website. You go to wengines.com. There you'll find a link to my online store. You can just purchase the books. There's other stuff on the online store too, like the small block Chevy dyno mule books and other stuff. But anyway, all that information is in here, so what you see is what we'll be into. So let's get to it. The engine itself, all the information is in here for those. But the engine itself is a 496. It had, on this case, with the race rights, because the chambers weren't stock. I mean, you can order them this way, but most people order the race rights with 119cc chambers. But the ones we use for testing were ordered with 115cc chambers, which you can get stock from Brodix as well. Those end up giving this is the race rights right here. All the inside sizes and stuff. I measured all that. But with that, flip too many pages. It yields 10.6 compression ratio. Now, the Rite 294s, I don't have, in the book, I don't have that information as far as the cross-sectional areas, because that's actually the head we started with, so it was still bolted on the engine, so I didn't even have a chance to flow it. However, from flowing other ones in the past, I can tell you this. These 270s and the 294s flow very close to the same. On the exhaust, almost identical. The intake side, the 294s, what it looks like they've done is they've taken this port, and where that CNC line ends right here, they essentially just made it a square. Because it looks like it's a square at the entry and then it narrows down into the same port beyond just the entry. It flows, the rectangular port actually flows a little bit more from the ones I've seen, but I did not flow the one that was on the engine because it was still on the engine. In general, they usually flow a little bit more. But it looks like the exact same head, besides just they modified the entry. But I don't have the measurements on that, except for I could tell you the compression ratio is the exact same because it was also 115 cc's. So unlike the comparison between the Pro Max Roval and the Pro Max rectangular port, those had 110 cc's versus 119 cc's, so their compression ratio was dramatically different. These had the exact same compression ratio with an oval versus rectangle and close to the same flow numbers. But again, both of them are going to be 10.6 compression ratio. The flow numbers are actually in here, so I'm going to try to flip through them real quick. This is the oval ports, the Race Rite, these ones. I don't have, don't have the rectangular ports. They're not doing outstanding. They only move like 323 CFM, and exhaust side's like 232. In general, if I had the 294s, they're probably going to do like almost 330, about 7 CFM better, and the exact same on the exhaust, from what I've seen. But let's look at the power results here. So this one is, we're going to start with the 294 because this was the first one that was on the engine. And this one's with the air gap. We tested all the heads with multiple intakes, but to get a fair comparison, I'm using the same style of intake to compare that head with the 294. So in this test, it had the Edelbrock air gap intake. And by the way, I should back up. I've done so much of those videos. The camshaft itself is a hydraulic roller 247-252 and a 630 lift, 1,000 CFM, 4150 carburetor. So not small. Anyway, this was with the air gap intake. We'd also done with the 454. Actually, I think we did a track wear intake with this one, which is a single plane. And those are the two that were tested with this one. But just to be fair, we tested this head, the oval port with the air gap. So we tested the Rite rectangular ports also with the air gap. So they have the exact same manifold just different openings. But here you go. So the Race Rite did 607 as far as horsepower. Looks like it's the best one. And it made 612 foot-pounds of torque. And I don't have an overlay for this. For whatever reason, I just didn't print that one. And then this is the oval ports. So here we have the rectangular ports, 607, 612. Here's the oval ports. So rectangle ports, these are ovals. They made considerably more. 621 and almost 620 foot-pounds of torque, 620 foot-pounds of torque. Same air gap intake, just an oval one instead of the rectangle. So if you're looking at it from a strictly airflow point of view, these ones actually flow, I know will flow less, even though I didn't flow the exact heads. I know they flow less than the Race Rites. But being that there's other things involved besides just airflow, obviously velocity, but also I call it, there's velocity gradients where there's changes in size. So if you can keep the size of the port exactly the same and go all the way in, it's going to be better than having where it gets bigger, smaller throughout the port. This one's far more consistent in that area than the 294 is, because it starts off big, gets shrunk, and then it's the same size as that. So even though it might flow a little bit more air, it didn't make any more power, it made less. So I'm also assuming that the velocity was much better with this one as well. Has to be. So if you move about the same amount of airflow and you're 20 cc smaller, you have more velocity. But anyway, it made quite a bit more. That's noticeable. So if you were one of the people that are debating between the two, whether I should get the 294s or the 270s, you should get the 270s. I don't, besides already having a rectangular intake, there's no reason really not to just go to this. To me, it just makes a better decision. Now, there are better ones that are rectangular ports that Brodix makes. We just didn't test them because these two were the same. For instance, they make a BB2 Plus, which is 312 cc's. That's a great rectangular port. That would have been a great test, but it's also got a raised exhaust port, although they do make a Race Rite version, which has a standard exhaust port. So there's other things we could have tested. But anyway, let me show you some of the other results so we can get this video out. These are some other weird things that was tested I wanted to show you. This is unusual. So this is the 294 head. So it's not this head, but the 294. I only showed you this one because the 294 head did do something kind of unusual. It gained more power using a single plane than any of the other heads that we tested. So on all the heads, including even this one, we tested with a dual plane and then also with the single plane. But with the Race Rite 294s gained the most with the single plane. I mean, that's a pretty big jump. And by the way, you can see the crossover points right here. So the air gap's here, and you notice it's about 4,600 RPM. From that point on, that YN track Warrior was used, and it was better. So the single plane was quite a bit better for most of the range with this one, which is unusual in the fact that this one gained so much more than the others. And the others, this gap was much shorter, what I'm trying to get at. So bit weird from that. All right, let's see what else I want to show you. This is these heads right here. These are these exact heads, the 270 ones. Besides using just the RPM air gap intake, I also wanted to test the HV 2017 manifold. Now you might say, what is that? Well, Brodix actually makes an oval port intake that's made to fit this head. Now that intake manifold, it's the most expensive dual plane that we tested. It came with just like this. It looks much like this, CNC bowl or gasket match, just like this. But it left a ridge in the port, just like that. But it's a lower height-wise than your air gap. It's also got a notch like the air gap, but much deeper. So it's a probably would fit underneath the stock hood better, but you could tell how much difference there is in power. So if you look at the whole thing, the red being the RPM air gap, the black one being the Brodix, it's not even close really. Which is weird because when we tested this Brodix intakes on the AFR 265 head, if you go back and watch that video, you'll see that gap was smaller, very, very small. Matter of fact, at the lower RPM, they're almost identical, and then it starts kind of pulling away. So it's a little weird. And going on. This is one of the other tests that I wouldn't have made a video on, but I wanted to show you this. So this is not this head. This is the ProMax 317 head that was used on this one. And it had the 454R intake, which is the Edelbrock one. It's a single plane. But I show you this because the red line is with the 1-inch open spacer. The black line's with the 1-inch 4-hole tapered spacer from AFR. And the reason why I even do this test is because if you have watched my channel, you will have watched the small block Chevy dyno mule, and you will know that on the small block Chevy, when we did this huge dyno testing, that AFR 1-inch 4-hole taper spacer was dramatically better than the 1-inch open spacer, especially in this spot right through here. I mean, really big gains. However, on the big block, it didn't make any difference really at all. This is the difference. This is one of those things about intake spacers are almost engine independent, because it really made a huge difference on a small block. It just didn't here. Because if you look, the red line, I mean, we're kind of going up and down, but for the most part, they're identical. There's spots where the red line's better, obviously, than the black line, which if you look at the small block, it would be totally the reversed. So point being is, it looks like the open spacer was actually better in most spots than it would be with the 4-hole taper. Now, this might be the fact that because this is a big block and it's a bigger engine, it needed more plenum volume than the small block did. So having the 1-inch open giving more plenum volume than the 4-hole taper made more of a difference. However, this difference, as you could tell, is negligible. But I only point that out because it's more of an unusual one. So there you go. By the way, for all the tests that we talked about, like I just did, they were all end up with a 1-inch open spacer. We just did this in the beginning just to kind of see. So going on, I'll show you some of these others. I've already talked about that. I'm only flipping through the pages because I want to make sure I got some of this other stuff kind of covered. Yeah, this was a weird one too. This was, and I'm not making fun of marks on this carburetor. On the very first test we had done, or one of the earlier tests, we wanted to see what the difference is in carburetors. This red line is my 1000 CFM race demon carburetor that I have used for so much of my dyno testing. That carburetor has been reliable. It's been on the S10. Mark Whitener redid it because it's a 1000 CFM demon carburetor, but he actually put the special annular boosters in there because they come standard with a down leg. But that race demon, you could actually switch to an annular booster. And I had tried it before with an annular booster from them and actually made less power. His annular boosters are totally different, have smaller holes and more of them, and probably do a better job. And it's been the king of pretty much anything we've put it on as far as on the dyno until now. This carburetor compared against was a 1000 CFM Pro Systems carburetor, and it did have down leg boosters. But I talked to Mark about it, and I was just ragging him. I wasn't being mad or nothing like that. I can't believe something beat you. It's more that this 1000 CFM carburetor really is rated to a higher CFM than this one. So it's got a bigger venturi and stuff. So it actually really does actually move more air than this. So even though they're both rated at 1000, my 1000's actually not moving as much as that 1000 would be in theory. But the difference is kind of big. So this made a more difference than it did with the carb spacer. But I do want to point out this. So if you're wondering about annular boosters versus down leg, look how much more torque it makes in the lower RPM. I mean, that's pretty big. So it's not strictly CFM just gained everywhere. That annular booster probably with the better atomization really helped in this point. But when the engines, because this is a bigger engine, needs more air, it makes more of a difference. This difference, by the way, is about 10. So anyway, I thought I'd show you that. That's pretty much wraps up what's going on with the big block dyno mule. If you want the book, go to my website, wengines.com. You'll see an online link, the link to my online store. I think next Sunday I'm just which I have never made a book about, and I probably won't. I'll just combine it with other stuff. I actually did a third session with the small block dyno mule, and I really didn't talk about much about it besides to say which intake manifold actually was the best of all the ones I tested. I think I'm going to do that next Sunday is just going to be wrapping all that up and showing you the results from that. And anyway, as far as future dyno testing, I'm going to try to get a hold of Gary at Dunsworth Machine and see if I can't schedule, not this week, but the following week, because obviously this one's 4th of July week. But hopefully the following week I can schedule a time to get down there, put the Pro Max heads on the small block, and see if we can't make some pulls and see what happens. As far as the big block, I'm kind of waiting to get back with Nick, and I still have to finish up the Pro Max heads. For those who don't follow, I took the Pro Max 290s that was used on this, and I've modified them since, and so have the 317s. I'd like to get back and retest that, but we might be doing something later date with that anyway. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Remember, I'm no Superman. You guys take care.